Another day, another story. A desire to fish created an epic 1889 deluge. For years, the Gilded Age's most powerful industrialists gathered at Lake Conemaugh, an idyllic body of water made possible by Pennsylvania's South Fork Dam. Their secret retreat was a place to fish, hunt and consolidate their power. Welcome to Tabo Eminent channel. Until May 31, 1889, that is. That's when a dam altered by the exclusive club burst, and the unthinkable happened. Torrents of water rushed downstream as the dam failed, inundating nearby Johnstown with 16 million tons of water and wiping out much of the town. The flood ended up being the deadliest in American history. But could it have been prevented? Idyllic retreat, on a shaky foundation. Disaster was far from the minds of Pennsylvania magnates like Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Mellon, and Henry Clay Frick when they joined the secretive South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Founded in 1879, the club was designed to give the most powerful men in Pennsylvania a quiet retreat, a place to enjoy the magnificent wealth they had accumulated in the steel, railroad, and other industries. The club owned a private, artificial lake where they gathered in a clubhouse and private cottages to mingle and enjoy the pleasures of nature. They picnicked, swam and fished, puffing on cigars and taking advantage of a rare chance to relax. But the lake where so much wealth and power gathered was built on a shaky foundation. Before the club bought it, the unnamed reservoir was part of Pennsylvania's canal system. Once it came into the hands of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, they modified it to their recreational interests. They added a fish screen onto the spillway, the structure built to keep water from building up too high and straining the dam. And most importantly of all, they lowered the dam, which sat right above Johnstown. Like the Day of Judgment. When an unusually strong storm hit the area on May 28, 1889, pounding the area with between 6 and 10 inches of water in just 24 hours, water levels at the dam began to rise. On May 31st, Elias Unger, who managed the club, looked outside and began to worry about the rising waters. He supervised a group of Italian laborers as they frantically dug a new spillway and tried to unclog the existing one. They were too late. As the dam burst, a 30 to 40 foot high wave rushed the 14 miles toward Johnstown. The flood was as wide as the Mississippi River and 3 times more powerful than Niagara Falls. As it hit Johnstown, all hell broke loose. Locomotives weighing 170,000 pounds were wrenched from railroad tracks and swept thousands of feet. Debris piled up 40 feet high, some caught fire as it hit bridges and buildings. People were sucked from buildings and tossed into a raging torrent. It was like the Day of Judgment I have since seen pictured in books, Gertrude Quinn Slattery later recalled. Pandemonium had broken loose, screams, cries and people were running. Pets and people struggled to escape the rushing waters, but when the wall of water arrived, they were helpless. It was a moving mass black with houses, trees, boulders, logs, and rafters coming down like an avalanche, she wrote. When the waters finally receded, the extent of the damage became clear. According to the Johnstown Area Heritage Association, 2,209 people died, almost 400 of them children. Among the dead were 99 entire families. The $17 million in damage, more than $4.4 billion in current dollars, included 1,600 obliterated homes and 4 square miles of complete destruction. In the aftermath, bodies were found as far away as Cincinnati, Ohio, more than 400 miles away. House ripped from its foundation by the flood in Johnstown, with a tree trunk sticking out of a window. Credit, Bettman/Getty Images. Deadly effects, no accountability. The world rushed to help. The American Red Cross, led by Clara Barton, worked tirelessly to help injured and homeless residents in its first major initiative, and workers like morticians and builders came from all over the country. Money poured in, too. It was the deadliest non-hurricane flood in American history, and people wanted answers. However, the powerful industrialists whose modifications had caused the flood were never held legally accountable. In court, They claimed that they only lowered the dam by 1 foot and that the flood was an act of God. Individuals who sued all lost in court, and some even went bankrupt. Though the American legal system soon adopted precedents that made it possible to hold defendants liable for their modifications to land, the magnates behind the Johnstown flood walked off scot-free. Nobody, it seemed, was willing to challenge America's most powerful men. That's changed in modern years as scientists and historians work to reconstruct what happened during the fateful flood. Only in 2013 did researchers from the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown find out the real truth about the club's claims with the help of hydrological research and advanced mapping. They determined that contrary to the club's claims, the dam had been lowered by 3 feet, not 1, and that the changes reduced the dam's ability to discharge stormwater by half. It turns out that the flood could actually have been prevented, if only the magnates of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club had been willing to trade in a bit of their leisure for the safety of the town below. The phrase America's deadliest flood typically refers to the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. While it is not accurate to attribute the flood solely to a group of America's most powerful men, it is true that human decisions and actions played a significant role in the disaster. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 was a result of a combination of factors, including heavy rainfall, snowmelt, and poor decisions related to the management of the Mississippi River. The flood affected multiple states along the Mississippi River, causing widespread devastation. Several key factors contributed to the severity of the flood. Heavy rainfall and snowmelt. Unusually heavy rainfall in the Mississippi Valley in the spring of 1927, coupled with melting snow from the northern regions, led to a massive volume of water flowing into the Mississippi River. Levee systems. The levee system along the Mississippi River was not adequately designed or maintained to handle such a large volume of water. Levees were built to protect agricultural land, but the focus was often on local interests rather than the overall health of the river system. Decision-making. The decisions made by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and local authorities exacerbated the situation. In an effort to protect urban areas and valuable farmland, decisions were made to intentionally breach levees at certain points, redirecting floodwaters into less populated areas. This, however, caused widespread devastation to rural communities. Social inequities. The impact of the flood was disproportionately felt by African American communities. Many of the affected areas were predominantly populated by African Americans who were often forced to work in dangerous conditions to shore up levees or were left stranded without adequate support. The response to the flood highlighted social and racial disparities, as relief efforts were often discriminatory. The aftermath of the disaster contributed to changes in federal policies related to flood control and disaster response. It's essential to recognize that the 1927 flood was a complex event with numerous contributing factors. While certain decisions by those in positions of power did play a role, it is inaccurate to attribute the entire event to a specific group of individuals. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 was a catastrophic event that had far-reaching social, economic, and political consequences. Here's more of the story. Impact on communities. The floodwaters submerged vast areas of land, displacing hundreds of thousands of people and causing the loss of homes, crops, and livestock. Many African American sharecroppers and tenant farmers, who were already economically disadvantaged, suffered disproportionately. They were often forced to work on levees to protect the property of wealthier landowners. Role of Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover, who later became the 31st President of the United States, was appointed by President Calvin Coolidge to head the Mississippi Flood Control Association. Hoover's role in coordinating relief efforts catapulted him into the national spotlight. Formation of the Flood Control Act of 1928. In response to the devastating flood, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1928. This legislation aimed to improve the nation's flood control infrastructure and prevent similar disasters in the future. The act empowered the federal government, particularly the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to develop comprehensive plans for flood control on the Mississippi River. Migration and the Great Migration. The flood contributed to the Great Migration, as many displaced individuals, especially African Americans, moved from the rural South to urban centers in the North in search of better opportunities and living conditions. Legacy of social inequities. The response to the flood highlighted systemic racial and economic disparities. Relief efforts often favored white landowners over black sharecroppers, and discriminatory practices were prevalent in the distribution of aid. Cultural impact. The flood left a lasting impact on American literature and music. Artists like blues musicians and writers such as William Faulkner drew inspiration from the struggles and hardships faced by the people affected by the flood. Shift in federal policies. The disaster prompted a re-evaluation of federal policies regarding flood control. The government began investing in larger and more comprehensive levee systems, reservoirs, and other infrastructure to mitigate the impact of future floods. Long-term changes. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 had a profound and lasting impact on the way the United States approached water management, disaster relief, and infrastructure development. It led to a more centralized and coordinated federal approach to flood control. In summary, the flood of 1927 was a tragic event that exposed deep-seated social and racial inequalities. Its aftermath triggered significant changes in policy and infrastructure development, shaping the nation's approach to disaster response and water management in the decades that followed. The story of the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 also involves the political dynamics of the time, the role of media, and the influence of individuals who played pivotal roles. Here are more aspects of the story. Political fallout. The response to the flood had political implications. Herbert Hoover's involvement in relief efforts increased his visibility and contributed to his reputation as a problem solver. Hoover's actions during the flood were seen as effective crisis management, and he went on to win the presidency in 1928. The flood also strained the relationship between the federal government and local authorities. It underscored the need for a coordinated federal approach to disaster response and flood control. Media coverage. The flood received extensive media coverage, bringing the disaster to the forefront of national attention. Newspapers, radio, and newsreels conveyed the extent of the devastation and the struggles of those affected. The media coverage helped galvanize public support for relief efforts and shed light on the social injustices and discrimination that occurred during the crisis. Role of African American leaders. African American leaders, such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, played significant roles in advocating for the rights of Black flood victims. They highlighted the disparities in relief efforts and discrimination faced by African Americans during and after the disaster. Flood control measures. In the aftermath of the flood, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers implemented extensive flood control measures, including the construction of dams, levees, and spillways. These measures were aimed at preventing similar disasters and protecting communities along the Mississippi River. Economic impact. The flood had a profound economic impact on the region. Agriculture suffered extensive damage, leading to a decline in crop yields and economic hardship for many farmers. The disruption in the agricultural sector had ripple effects on the national economy. Social repercussions. The flood laid bare the racial and social inequalities of the time. The mistreatment of African Americans during the crisis highlighted the systemic racism embedded in relief efforts and brought attention to the need for civil rights reforms. Literary and artistic response. The cultural impact of the flood extended to literature, music, and art. Writers and artists, such as Richard Wright and Walker Evans, documented the experiences of those affected. The flood became a recurring theme in the cultural narrative of the time. The long-term impact on Mississippi River management. The flood prompted a reassessment of the country's approach to managing the Mississippi River. It led to the establishment of the Mississippi River Commission and marked a shift towards more comprehensive and scientifically informed flood control measures. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 remains a significant chapter in American history. intertwining natural disaster, human response, political maneuvering, and social justice issues. It left an enduring legacy that influenced policies, politics, and cultural expression in the decades that followed. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.